9 Eastern.
There are more than 200,000 women serving in the U.S. military, thousands shipped off to Iraq and Afghanistan.
That's right, and while the U.S. still officially bans women from combat, there are many still fighting and dying on the front lines. Joining us now is Marine Corps Reservist Jane Blair. She tells her story in a new book called Hesitation Kills, a female Marine officer's combat experiences in Iraq. And Jane joins us right now. I want to get to why you named the book what you named it. But first, you know, so few countries allow women on the front lines. The U.S. is not one of those countries that does, and they offer them women to do that in limited roles. So how did you end up on the front lines in Iraq?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. You know, today's battlefield is a lot different than it may have been, you know, just even 50 years ago. People find themselves in support units on the front line because the front line is no longer a defined space. People in support roles or in different units are finding that the battlefield's really everywhere. Serving in Afghanistan or in Iraq, you can find yourself really just confronted in any role that you are being on the front line.
And you were doing aerial reconnaissance, is that right?
That's correct.
So that's the role that you were doing on the front line.
Exactly. I served in an aerial reconnaissance unit, and my unit found itself actually leaping ahead of a lot of the combat units because we had to go ahead of the infantry sometimes.
And you joined the Marines in 1999. This was obviously before 9/11. Did you ever think you would end up on the front lines?
You know, I get this question a lot. I didn't. I mean, of course, when you sign the oath, that's part of the stipulation, is that you know what you're getting into. You know that that could be a possibility. But I joined during peacetime, and there wasn't even really the thought that I might be going into this role. But, you know, I'm very proud of my service that I did overseas, and I think that it was always a possibility, and you have to prepare mentally for the idea of, you know, am I going to be prepared to go into that role?
Well, the book is terrific. It's called Hesitation Kills. Why Hesitation Kills?
Well, you know, it was something that an officer said to me when I was in training, and he pulled a group of us aside and he said, you know, hesitation kills in combat. It's so important that people are prepared to make that decision, but not lightly. Killing is not something that I necessarily advocate. It should always be a last resort in
Right, but you're obviously well aware of the debate, you know, about female combat troops. They're too emotionally fragile. They're not physically strong enough. Did you experience a lot of discrimination from your male counterparts when you were overseas?
You know, as a second lieutenant, when I was first in Iraq, there was a certain amount of rites of passage that I think every Marine goes through. But I partially wrote this book to show that there is a role for women in the military, a positive role. And I felt once I learned to deal with the military culture, people accepted me just like any other Marine.
You wrote a piece for the Washington Post about the 5 myths about women in combat, and you touch on physical strength, sexual tension, and the idea that women can be a distraction on the battlefield. Are those myths?
I believe so. I think, you know, if an officer or enlisted woman presents themselves in a positive manner and shows herself first as a military member, vice making any excuses or expecting any kind of special, you know, concessions, I think her role can be just like any other military member. And whether that's serving in a support unit or serving, you know, in a role that she finds herself on the front lines, I think so.
You do believe that women should be able to serve in full combat roles, though, right? What's your best argument for that?
Well, you know, as a military member, I support what Congress says, and I think that they have the best avenue of really looking at the issue from all different angles. But from my personal opinion, I mean, women are already serving in this capacity. I think there's a role for them that is out there, whether they're cultural representative or providing some kind of language ability or service on the front lines, or serving fully as a female in those front lines.
Well, let's be honest, it's happening anyway because of the nature of the wars, right?
Exactly, and you know, it's important that we do look at the fact that women are serving in this capacity.
But do you think, I mean, since you've been on the battlefield with men and other women, do you think that men and women process I don't know, some of the emotions of the battlefield differently? I mean, do you see, or does your training take away sort of those differences so that it is about the training and the experience in that way?
You know, I think it's harder for women at first just because of the way that women are raised in America to integrate into the military. I mean, some women maybe not. But because of that, I think training sort of equalizes the playing field. And certainly there's a longer learning curve sometimes, I think, for women to reach that role where, you know, you're part of the team and you're integrated fully. But I think after a while, you know, serving in the military, you become just like any other sailor, Marine, you know, so you become fully integrated.
One last question. It is Memorial Day, of course. I'm sure Memorial Day takes on a different meaning for you. And your brother-in-law is in Afghanistan, right?
Yes, Captain Timothy Blair. He serves with the Wolfhounds. They're in the mountains of Afghanistan right now with the 27th Infantry Regiment. And I just wanted to remind people that there are men and women still out there on the battlefield, and their families are always worried and thinking about them. It's important that we remember them. My brother-in-law's unit just had casualties last week, and I think it's important that people remember that there are still people serving out there.
Jane Blair, author of Hesitation Kills, also a Marine Corps reservist. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Ahead on American Morning, storms strike again. Michigan and other parts of the upper Midwest